Here is Ancient Charm Grief on Jade Steps, a purple shimmering ink. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion on this ink. This is a super dark shimmering purple ink. So dark, in fact, that it is only during the chromatography that you can learn that it's actually a purple. For that reason, I may be looking at this more like it was a black. As paper and as off-camera pens change, I didn't see any kind of tone variation and I didn't see any kind of shading. But the shimmer does manage to come through even on some of the non-fountain pen friendly papers. It performs well enough on the non-fountain pen friendly papers. It's just a weird phrase to have to put together, though it does come across at times a bit duller as a tone, and of course the shimmer comes through, but not nearly as much. Now, I enjoy shimmer inks, but I don't know how many people would be looking for this, an almost black with a silver shimmer. I haven't purchased another sample, and I have no plans of any more after this. It's just not what I would go for shimmers, though, you know, it might be right up somebody else's alley. The pen for today is a Sailor Riello. Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there with the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. We get a very nice, so dark purple, it looks black. We're going to talk about it like it's black. Nice crisp lines, super dark the whole way, no feather, no spread. Yes, the shimmer is coming through, though because it's wet on camera right now, you're likely not seeing it. You have to turn it with it. When you look straight on, you don't see it nearly as much, which makes this pretty interesting in how it performs for its shimmer. Now, I get no shading whatsoever. It performs like it is a super dark, rich black ink. Looking at the back of the page, between those wiggling fingers, there is no bleeding, no ghosting, and no problem. Let's take a look at some other inks from the same manufacturer. Here is Ancient Charm number 16, October. Here is Ancient Charm on the Love of Lotus. Here is Ancient Charm, the Moon over the Mountain Pass. Here is Ancient Charm, the Phoenix. The next writing sample is done in a Portage reporter's notebook. We are getting the exact same tone that we had on the Clairfontaine. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread. The shimmer does come through every now and then in bits, but I have a feeling when it comes through, it had to be much heavier in that area. Mostly the shimmer's not coming through. No, what's also not happening? Shading. If you did not know this was purple, you would call it black, and you would call it a great black ink. Looking at the back of the page, between the wiggling fingers, there's no bleeding and no ghosting. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is immediately put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. The one on the right, marked with a D, is let dry for 10 minutes before putting into water. The next writing sample is done on a national brand Steno notebook. We get no kind of tone shift from this being on a toned paper, meaning that either it's just so dark it doesn't care what's underneath it, or it's rather opaque. It's the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It still doesn't feather, it still doesn't spread. On this paper, I'm not getting the shimmer coming through, perhaps a bit more absorbent than the last paper, but the shimmer's not there. You know what else is still not there? Shading, giving beautiful dark black crisp lines out of this very dark purple. Looking at the back of the page, we see a couple of spots where the ink got very deep into the paper, but it never bled through touching the page underneath. And in fact, those dark spots, I don't think would stop you from being able to write back here. It's never so deep that it would destroy both sides. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. The highlighter is on the top left, pen flush is on the top right, 1/3 bleach solution is on the bottom left, and water is on the bottom right. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook. Without a doubt, it stands out against this quad rule with no problems at all. It's the same tone as it was on the Clairfontaine. It doesn't feather, doesn't spread, it doesn't shade. The shimmer still manages to come through. Not that that's a surprise. This is a coated paper. I'm going to say this is pretty good as a combination if you really wanted to. Looking at the back of the page, between those wiggling fingers, there is no bleeding, no ghosting, and no problem for the student to continue their notes. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is Ackerman, their number 30. Here is Aurora Purple. Here is Birmingham Pen Company, Phipps Conservatory Verbenham. Here is Califolio Bergagni. The next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook. It still stands out against the quad rule without any kind of a problem because as a purple, it is so dark that it may as well be black. It's the same tone that we had on the Clairfontaine. It did not get dulled at all by this paper. In fact, this paper gave the best performance for this ink. It's no feather, no spread. It had the most amount of shimmer of the non-fountain pen friendly papers come through, which really was surprising me. Not surprising was no shading. Looking at the back of the page, between the wiggling fingers is no bleeding and no ghosting. While it's nice to see ink in the same color family, I prefer to see ink to complement the color on the page. Here is Diamine Golden Oasis. Here is Pilot Fuyu Soyugan, or Rigor of Winter. Here is Pilot Mixable Pink. Here is Sailor Kobe number 21. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. While this is just as dark a black as it was on the Clairfontaine paper, it feathers quite a bit more, it spreads quite a bit more. This is the worst performance of the non-fountain pen friendly papers. However, that's not unexpected. It is the worst of them, and only in these reviews because people really seem to like this part. Now, despite the feathering and the spreading, I think if you ran with a finer nib, it would be much, much better, though this is a fine that looks kind of like a broad. Looking at the back of the page, we see the ink gets very deep into the paper. You can't write and have notes on both sides, or you'll lose both, but nothing bled through touching the page underneath. So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink? From the medium flow broad of the Sailor Realo, it looks black, but with some shimmer, no shading, and the shimmer wasn't there. It could likely, if the shimmer wasn't there, it could likely pass in professional environments. With the shimmer, you might piss somebody off. You know, it depends on how whimsical your office is. Off camera, I tried this in a dry medium pen, and it does become a bit more of a dark purple than just black. Very dark, but still, it did show a little more color than being black, but still no shading. I certainly prefer it with the hints of purple from the medium flow, medium nib, so I would advise avoiding a wet pen and choosing a medium flow broad for the tone that you could get. I hope you got something out of this video, and thanks for watching. I want to let you know that the best way you can support this or any channel is to let retailers know where you heard of something if you go to buy.